Yeah. Well, I don't know what.
We're going to get started. I want to welcome everyone to J.B. Grinnell and Journeys of Freedom. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Yes.
This is a program in two parts, sponsored by the Grinnell Historical Museum and Drake Community Library. I want to note here that although the museum is not open yet for visitors, they've been busy behind the scenes, as you can tell just for this program alone. And we appreciate their support right now in bringing this program forward. I want to especially thank Barb Leese, who is a board member of the museum, and her enthusiastic energy never fails to inspire me, and it was just really great working with her on this program. We're live streaming this program with some new technology, which you can see there in the center table. There's a camera called the Owl. It looks like an owl. Right now, others in the story room, our overflow room, they're watching via live stream. And our hope is that we will have a decent recording of this program available for those who'd like to see it. If we do, we'll be letting people know. A big thank you to our tech savvy, Monique Shore, for her generosity and confidence in trying out something so brand new without any guarantees that it would work. As I mentioned, this is a two-part program, and we will not be taking a break between the two parts, each of which will be about a half hour in length. Once part two is ended, we'll open the program for a few questions and answers and give the Kimles a chance to tell us about their novel. You're most welcome to stay for the book signing, which will be at the book tables near the windows. Copies of the book will also be available at the front desk. And while I'm at it, be sure to stop and enjoy the paintings that are out in the lobby that Patricia has painted. She's an artist, as you'll be able to see when you see her work out there, in addition to being a writer. Before I introduce our speaker for part one of this program, I want to draw your attention to a tribute to Karen Groves, placed on the refreshment table. Many of you knew Karen, but perhaps not all of you are aware of her dedication to Grinnell's history. Karen was an expert on Grinnell's role in the Underground Railroad and on local Iowans who served in the Civil War. We want to honor her today, knowing that if she were still with us, she'd be at this event. She's still with us in spirit for sure, and we're grateful for her indispensable contributions to the knowledge of our community's history. Our speaker for the first part of this program is so well known that he hardly needs an introduction. Jon Andelson, professor of anthropology at Grinnell College and past director of the college's Center for Prairie Studies, will be speaking to us about J.B. Grinnell, who, as you can see, is also with us today. He's joining us from the year 1855, when he founded Grinnell, and that photograph is courtesy of the museum who brought it today. Professor Andelson asks a very good question in the title to his talk, almost too good for us. What drove J.B. Grinnell? I, for one, am looking forward to hearing his exploration of this question, and it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Andelson to the podium.
I don't need you.
Yeah, just turn yours on. Yep.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have some notes here somewhere. And I'll add my voice of welcome to this event to Liz's. Thank you for that nice introduction. The highlight of the event, in my opinion, is not my talk, but the Kimle's one-act play, which is on a topic related to the contents of their book. Now, I read the book in an early manuscript version when the title was Grinnell. I didn't know until I got here today. Got a new title, a little broader, perhaps. Without giving too much away, I'll simply say that the book tells the story of 5 people, 2 black and 3 white, whom fate threw together on a journey on the Underground Railroad. That mysterious network of conductors and false bottomed wagons and sub-basement hiding places where African Americans fleeing slavery in the South tried to use it to get to freedom in the North or in Canada. The character's destination in the Kimle's book is, of course, Grinnell, Iowa, where they hope to get assistance from the town's namesake founder and leading citizen and an ardent abolitionist. So by way of preface to their presentation of the one-act play, I was asked to say a few words about Josiah Bushnell Grinnell. And you know, our timing could not be better because this is the 200th anniversary year of J.B. Grinnell's birth. He was born on December 22nd, 1821. So the timing is really great. And isn't it wonderful that this man's story is still worth telling? I don't have time to review Grinnell's life in detail, of course. Rather, I'm going to summarize his accomplishments and then briefly address a couple of questions about him that occurred to me and perhaps to you. The first, some highlights from his life. Josiah Bushnell Grinnell was born in New Haven, Vermont, not New Haven, Connecticut, which is a better known New Haven, but New Haven, Vermont, which in 1820, the year before he was born, had a population of 1,566, just a little town in Vermont. And in 2018, New Haven, Vermont had a population of 1,712. So it's still a little town in Vermont. So he was a New Englander, a Yankee, and remained one in his predilections for hard work, self-reliance, piety, thrift, and devotion to civic duty. Those were the New England values that his family circumstances were in. His first job was as a teacher. He then trained for the ministry, and he started the first Congregationalist church in Washington, D.C. He gave what may have been the first abolitionist sermon in the city of Washington, D.C. At that time, Washington was rather pro-slavery, and Grinnell lost his post, maybe as a result of giving that abolitionist sermon. He went to New York City then in a new pulpit, but there he lost his voice from overuse, and he turned to social work for a time. He was a social worker. He was a family man. He was a devoted husband and father of 2 daughters. He was also a temperance man, and he favored laws that restricted the availability of alcohol. He was a promoter of education as a route towards social improvement. We all think of education as a route toward individual improvement, but for Grinnell, it was bigger than that. It was a route towards social improvement, uplifting entire communities through education. He was a utopian visionary in this vein. He imagined building a new community in the West where these values, those New England values, and then the values of temperance and education would be put to work. And in 1855, with 3 other people, 3 other gentlemen, he founded the town that came to be named after him. And a few years later, he attracted Iowa College, then in Davenport, to move to the town of Grinnell, thus fulfilling his vision of having a university here. Well, we're not a university. I'm close, we're a college. No graduate school, but it worked fine. He was also an abolitionist and a conductor on the Underground Railroad. It's well known that he hosted John Brown not long after John Brown's notorious punitive raid into Missouri, after he had learned about the vigilante raid on Lawrence, Kansas, where Lawrence, Kansas, an abolitionist town, was burned to the ground pretty much. And this upset John Brown, and so he went down to Missouri, where a lot of the folks had come from that burned down Lawrence, and he killed some of them. So there was a price on his head, and J.B. Grinnell knew that when he welcomed John Brown to stay with him overnight. He was taking a chance. Grinnell was also a land speculator and a businessman. He was a successful sheep breeder, and he was the first president of the Iowa Wool Growers Association. I really thought that was cool. About that. He was also an avid gardener and a lover of trees. When the town was established, there wasn't a tree in sight, at least according to some of the early accounts. And J.B. Grinnell went to work right away planting trees all over the place. And now we think of Grinnell today as the city, well, with a lot fewer trees than before the derecho. We still think of it as a city of trees. He was a noted orator and a much sought after public speaker. He was a member of the Iowa Senate from 1856 to 1860, 2 terms in the Iowa Senate, where, among other things, he championed free public education in Iowa, which of course came to pass. He studied law. He was admitted to the Iowa bar in 1858, and he opened a law practice in Grinnell. What else? He was a delegate to the 1860 Republican National Convention, and there was a supporter of the nomination of Abraham Lincoln. President. He was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives for 2 terms, starting in 1862. Some of you maybe seen the movie Lincoln. It's a wonderful scene in the movie Lincoln when they're taking the roll call vote in Congress about the emancipation of slaves, and you hear them doing the roll call, and you hear Mr. Grinnell, hi. He was there for that vote. He was a promoter of railroads across Iowa. He was a member of the board of which railroad? The Rock Island Railroad. He was also one of the founders of the railroad that linked Grinnell to Montezuma County seat. He played a big role in promoting that. He was a friend of the Meskwaki Nation, and he supported them in their preference, rather than being moved to a reservation in central Kansas. They wanted to stay, at least a significant proportion of them wanted to stay here in Iowa, and Grinnell supported them in this and supported them continuing to receive government payments, which they would have gotten had they moved to the reservation in Kansas, but Grinnell supported this alternative arrangement, which the Meskwaki preferred. And a few years ago, when their historical museum opened, the Meskwaki settlement, I was going through the exhibits, and there, lo and behold, was a photograph of J.B. Grinnell. I can't remember now if it was that photograph, but it was one of the photographs of Grinnell. And I wandered a little further, and lo and behold, here was a second photograph of J.B. Grinnell, the only white man who's represented twice in the Meskwaki Museum. I think a testament to their appreciation for his help. In 1880, he was elected mayor of Grinnell, which was his final public service position. Wow. Can anybody here top that? Maybe a few more years. Keep at it. What do you think when you hear about a life so full of accomplishments? I always wonder what drove the person to undertake and accomplish so much in a lifetime. Excuse me. Thanks for the water. I hope I don't lose my voice. family, J.B. Grinnell was his was. It's customary to begin looking for an answer to such a question by asking about the circumstances under which a person was raised, under which they grew up. We'll consider this, but I want to go even farther back in time, since I find in J.B. Grinnell's ancestral past some things that may help to explain what drove him. In the late 17th century, we find the Grinnell family, then spelled G-R-E-N-E-L-L-E, and I suppose pronounced Grinnell. We find the Grinnell family in France, specifically in Paris, where today there is a Grinnell neighborhood, a Grinnell Boulevard, and even a Hotel Grinnell. Yeah. And like about 8% of the population of France in the late 17th century, the Grinnells were Huguenots. In other words, French Protestants in a predominantly Catholic country. Now, sectarian tensions had been flaring across Europe in the aftermath of Martin Luther's act of nailing the 95 Theses to the door of the church in Wittenberg, Germany, which in 1517, which historians typically view as the beginning of the Reformation. In France, there was a kind of an uneasy truce between Protestants and Catholics, due in part to an edict that the government put into effect called the Edict of Nantes, which granted Protestants, these Huguenots, certain rights and privileges which maybe they weren't getting in other Catholic countries. But in 1685, the crown revoked the Edict of Nantes, which changed the landscape dramatically. Facing brutal persecution, French Protestants had three alternatives. They could change their religion, they could convert to Catholicism, they could go into hiding, or they could flee the country. The Grinnells chose the latter and left for Wales. There are no primary sources that I've seen, maybe they're out there somewhere. I don't consider myself an expert on Grinnell by any means. But I haven't run into any primary sources detailing the family's departure from France. Undoubtedly, they knew a lot of people whose lives were completely overthrown by this government action and the persecution that followed. It must have been a traumatic event for the Grinnells, as for many of their friends and neighbors who were forced to convert or go into hiding or flee. We do know that the memory of it remained vivid in the family for 200 years, since it's nearly the first thing that Grinnell talks about in his autobiography. And he writes that he is, how proud he is of his Huguenot ancestors. So, isn't it plausible that part of what drove J.B. Grinnell to stand up for minorities, particular persecuted minorities, was his own family's experience with persecution? Family subsequent history may have contributed to J.B. Grinnell's eagerness to go west and build a new community. After living in Wales for 25 years, the Grinnells immigrated to America in 1710. They settled first in Connecticut. Later, they moved to Massachusetts, and they settled first in Rhode Island, then to Connecticut, then to Massachusetts, and then to Vermont, where, as you already know, J.B. Grinnell was born in 1821. 5 family moves in 135 years might not have been exceptional at that time. But it does, I think, show a family that was pushing to improve its situation by moving to new places and getting involved in new opportunities and new activities. We could say, I think, that J.B. Grinnell's move to Iowa reproduced family history because the family was moving all the time. Okay, so what about Josiah's upbringing? He never knew his paternal grandparents. They died in an epidemic 7 years before he was born. His father, Myron Grinnell, was a farmer, a schoolmaster, and a local orator, and all three of those pursuits got passed on to his son, Josiah. Myron was also a temperance man and a total abstainer, and he passed that on to Josiah. Unfortunately, Myron was not a very prosperous farmer, and JB's early life was marked by poverty, especially after his father's death when Josiah was 10 years old. But if there was a lack of money in the family, in the house, there was an abundance of religion, mostly of a very demanding kind, pushed mostly by Josiah's mother. Catherine Hastings Grinnell was the daughter of a Scottish immigrant who died fighting for the United States in the War of 1812. Well, every morning the family gathered for prayer, during which Catherine not only shut the door, but bolted it. Nobody was leaving, nobody was coming in during family prayer. The children were expected to memorize a verse from the Bible every day. And then on Sundays, they were expected to recite from memory the week's Bible verses. Yeah. And the mother's rule was no verses, no supper. So she was pretty strict. In his autobiography, Josiah commented, I once thought my mother too rigid in the discipline of her sons, but not now, 39 years after her death. A cliche, perhaps, but I think sincere. Of all of those Bible verses, he later admitted to using them often in speeches and arguments. So he took them in, he took them to heart, and he did things with them later in life. And after all, he did initially choose the ministry as his calling. So here's my pitch. J.B. Grinnell's family background inspired his temperance attitudes, his abolitionist views, his religiosity, his industry as a way out of family poverty, his defense of the persecuted, his civic engagement, his involvement in agriculture, his support of education, and his oratorical skills. He also possessed enormous energy, and these are the things that I think drove him. Thinking about all of Grinnell's accomplishments, the second question that arose in my mind is, what was he like as a person? Was he approachable? Could I have just walked up to him on the street, or was he this bigger than life figure that would intimidate people? Or could I have related to it? Accounts by those who knew him suggest he was, in modern terms, a great guy. And I'm going to cite just one by Jon Andelson, who moved to Grinnell in 1855, very early on, when she was 7 years old, and had many interactions with J.B. Grinnell over the next 35 years. Johanna Harris Haynes wrote, he was alert, energetic, quick in his actions and thinking, and incessantly active in the furtherance of his many varied interests. She goes on, Mr. Grinnell was the very life of every social gathering. He was witty and quick in repartee. He had a fund of good stories and told them well. He knew how to touch the quick of human feelings. Professor Charles Payne, one of J.B. Grinnell's biographers, sums up the evidence from many people who knew him and left memories of him. He was expansive, exuberant, and communicative. He slapped men on the back and met them on their own ground. My goodness. And so I wonder, was he too good for us? Let me share 3 anecdotes that show that Josiah could be all too human. When he was a young man, not only did he embrace temperance and abolitionism, but also dietary reform. Professor Leonard F. Parker of the college, one of Grinnell's biographers, tells us that when Josiah was studying at the Oneida Institute, he and his classmates got swept up in a fad that renounced butter, meat, coffee, and tea, and that they slept on an oak board with only one blanket. Rather quickly, the young men began to experience disturbed sleep, and weight loss that weakened them, and they decided to abandon the We've already alluded to J.B. Grinnell's stand on temperance. He insisted that the town be dry. It wasn't just a personal thing. This was part of this social improvement. Insisted that the town be dry, and he wrote into the deeds of house sales that anyone caught selling liquor within the city limits would forfeit their property.
Wow.
And it would revert to J.B. Grinnell. Great. It's a surprise then to learn that in 1858, as a state senator, J.B. Grinnell voted to weaken existing prohibition laws in Iowa to allow the sale of beer. His reason? To keep German voters happy. And therefore keep them aligned to the abolitionist cause. It may not be irrelevant to note here that Myron Grinnell, J.B. Grinnell's father, though a temperance man, as I mentioned, was also the co-owner of a hard cider mill. Finally, one of the best known stories associated with Grinnell was told often by himself. His last ministerial assignment took him to New York City, where he also began to be involved in moving in the circle of doers and shakers, is that the expression, in New York City, in progressive political circles. And among the leading figures of the day, he met Horace Greeley, who was the celebrated editor of the New York Tribune. And Grinnell always claimed that it was to him that Horace Greeley gave his famous advice, "Go west, young man, go west, and grow up with the country." Unfortunately for the story, Greeley repeatedly and vehemently denied ever making a statement. In fact, Greeley denied ever making it at all. And I never said that. J.B. Grinnell was human. He was capable of being swept up in a goofy fad. He was capable of letting pragmatism outweigh principle on occasion. And he was capable of distorting the truth, I guess, to burnish his own reputation. So he was almost too good for us, but not quite. Feet on the ground, head in the clouds, feet on the ground. J.B. Grinnell not only dreamt utopian dreams of a better world for all people, but by his own unique combination of intelligence, compassion, and drive, he was able to realize some of those dreams here on the island prairie. He died of throat disease on March 31st, 1891, at home in Grinnell, 1 block directly south of where we're sitting this morning, at the age of 69. Shouldn't we all find ways to act on the example he set? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Please save any questions that you have for John for the end of the program. And if you need to take a stretch or if you need to leave, you're welcome to do it. The doors are not bolted. Next, I am pleased to welcome authors Patricia and Kevin Kimle to the stage where they will enact their one-act play, Missives of the Civil War, based upon characters from their book, a work of historical fiction called The Only Free Road, an Underground Railroad Saga Unveiled. In addition to being a writer, Patty is an artist and designer involved in the craft industry for many years. Her artwork graces the cover of their book, and the original is out in the hallway too. Kevin Kimle is an entrepreneur in the agricultural field and teaching professor of economics at Iowa State University. Kevin conceived the story on a family vacation years ago when they dragged their 4 young children on a trip that followed the Underground Railroad along Nebraska City, Tabor, Lewis, West Des Moines, and Grinnell. The story languished for a while as an unfinished project, but in 2016, Patty took on the research and writing while Kevin served as story consultant. The Only Free Road is available on Amazon and Kindle and will soon be available on Audible. And of course, we're going to have a book table here for any of you who wish to purchase the book today. Their play, Missives of the Civil War, is a series of letters that further explore the novel's themes of abolition and freedom and add some experiences of Iowans during the Civil War. In addition, their daughter Erin is here with us today, and she's going to be a little part of the program as well. Erin graduated in May from the University of Iowa, and her major was film. So now let me introduce you to Patricia and Kevin. We're going to need your mic.
Yeah.
We have 2 mics.
am Julia Chapin Grinnell. I was born on November 2nd, 1827 in Springfield, Massachusetts. My older sister, Mary Bliss Day, and I are the only living children out of 9. So many siblings who lived only 2 or 3 years, long enough for us to learn to love them, but not long enough to know and keep them. We had an older brother who grew to adulthood, but even he is now gone. Our dear parents have also passed, so we too are all that are left of our family. The same year, I married the Reverend Josiah B. Grinnell, 1852. Mary also wed a minister, the Reverend Pliny B. Day. They reside in New Hampshire. Though a great distance separates us, we remain close at heart.
April 15th, 1859, Grinnell, Iowa. Dearest sister, I know that Josiah has already written to Pliny to tell you both of the birth of our daughter, Carrie Holmes Grinnell, on April 2nd. I am now recovered enough to send you additional details, as I'm sure you want to know. She is a beautiful child and seems healthy and strong. I can't say yet if she favors me over Josiah, but her eyes are blue, just like Mary's. Her hair seems to be light with a bit of her papa's reddish gold mixed in. Physically, I am, well, much better than after Mary's birth. Of course, after Mary's birth, 4 days after we lost George, was so traumatic. And although I know it is not faithful to live in fear, I have clung to Mary more in the past 2 weeks than all of her first year. I fear that once again I shall lose the older child after the birth of the next, as has already happened to us twice. I now understand the well of strength our dear mama must have needed to draw from. Well, I think it is safe to say that spring has arrived here in Grinnell. The town is mostly settled down from the fervor and controversy of almost 2 months ago, although my husband is still quite ebullient. The notorious Captain John Brown passed through here with a group of 12 fugitives he had taken out of Missouri. Their liberation by force was in all the papers, but I don't know if you were following the story. Some folks, although abolitionist in sensibility, objected to the lawlessness of Brown's actions. After all, one of the slavers was killed in the action and much property was taken. When we had news of Brown's crossing the state, I really did not know how he would be received, even in the several places where he had previously claimed friends. And since he had never been in Grinnell, we had not expected him, although I had been playfully questioning Josiah about whether he would embrace or reject Brown. So let me relate the events. Captain Brown and Josiah had never met, but when he came to the door, he remembered our papa to him. At first, I didn't recognize him. He explained that he had been a resident of Springfield and knew my papa from First Church of Christ. Eventually, I felt I could place his face, but it has aged far more in the 10 years since I might have last seen him. His hair is long, generally unkempt, and nearly white. His beard also. His face is gaunt, but his eyes held a fire in them. When he looked at me, I couldn't look away from his gaze. It was mesmerizing. He had an intensity I have rarely seen in a sane person. He asked for our assistance for himself, his men, and the 12 folks he was escorting. JB welcomed him unreservedly. While they were here, the town was all astir. No subterfuge was attempted, as their presence was hardly a secret, particularly with so many men and armaments. The Negroes were put up at the hotel, and his men either upstairs here or in the wool barn. We kept them 2 days, and the town took up a collection for them. Afterward, Josiah and his friend in Iowa City helped them get to Chicago by train. I believe that the fugitives are safely in Canada now, dear souls. I hope you and Pliny are well. I shall attempt to further sketch my daughter for you once I begin to understand Carrie's personality. For now, as you know, a newborn mostly sleeps. Nevertheless, Mary is delighted with her baby sister, and so is her papa. Your affectionate sister, Julia.
I'm Samuel Harper. I was born a slave in Missouri in 1842. In 1858, I belonged to Mr. James Lawrence. When he died, all of us slaves were in danger of being sold further south in the settlement of Lawrence's estate. John Brown and his men brought us out of Missouri and escorted us to freedom in Canada. I am Jane Harper. I was born a slave near Lexington, Kentucky around the year 1830. In 1858, I was a slave in the household of David Cruz. I had been loaned out to him away from my stand. Brown's men rescued me and my master was shot and killed that night. While we stayed with John Brown's party in Springdale, Iowa, Mr. John and Mrs. Edith Painter were very kind to us. Mr. Painter, being a justice of the peace, performed a marriage ceremony for Sam and me.
October 1859, Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Painter, we are writing you to tell you that we are safe. We are free, Jane and me. We have rooms with a man and wife who are helping us to learn to live here. The lady of the house is a teacher. She is continuing for us what you started. That is, teaching us to read and write and cipher. I take any and all jobs that I can find. Driving freight is what I find most times. And Jane helps the lady here with laundry and sewing. My mother does lots of the cooking. God bless you. And thank you for your help and for marrying Jane and me in Iowa. Sam Harper.
I am Johanna Harris Haynes. I was born in Harrisville, Pennsylvania on November 24th, 1843. At age 11, I came to Grinnell, Iowa with my parents. My parents settled in Grinnell in order to live within a community of like-minded abolitionists. Both my future husband and I were members of the first graduating class of the Iowa College in 1865.
Grinnell, Iowa, January 10th, 1863. Dear Robert, I've just finished the Sunday dinner dishes and have a little time this afternoon to write to you. The meal and cleanup is so very little work these days. It is just Mama and me and William here now. Sometimes my sister Amelia and her husband come, but not often. She doesn't like to bring the baby Charles out in the winter. And William is pretty sullen and not good company right now, since he could not go with our brothers when they enlisted. Mama needs a man here to run the farm. I sympathize with his disappointment, but at least I've one less brother to worry for. James and Samuel have both been gone since November. James wrote me a week ago that the 40th Iowa were moving east from St. Louis. Their company is under the 16th Corps of the Department of the Tennessee. They are happy to serve under their good friend, Colonel Cooper. Mom and I take some comfort in that as well, since Colonel Cooper is by now considered a seasoned soldier. My brother Ephraim, being a doctor, has already been singled out from the 40th and reassigned to a hospital all the way down south in New Orleans. And Papa has not considered the boys' service in the Army enough contribution for our family. In December, at 58 years old, he joined up with the 37th Iowa Infantry. He enlisted because his conscience and his earnest feelings against slavery compelled him. Everyone in the 37th are older men, and he promised Mama they wouldn't be sent into battle. They're called the Graybeard Regiment, and they have been sent to St. Louis. Perhaps you two will meet up. The campus is so forlorn without many students in the classrooms. For we few girls, our coursework has sadly become erratic, constantly disturbed by news of the events and battles, by our concern for our loved ones. The reports of Union victories seem to be immediately followed by horrible defeats. Serious and systematic study seems difficult, if not impossible. My dearest Robert, I am glad that you are not in harm's way, but I beg you to be careful nonetheless. Send me news if you can. Yours truly, Joanne.
I am Robert Miller Haynes. I was born in Salem, Ohio on December 29th, 1838. I was a farm boy, and after age 18, I struck out further west in pursuit of my own destiny and advanced education. As an itinerant teacher, I funded my higher education pursuits and my rambling. I made several stops in Indiana before I ended up in Grinnell, where I enrolled at the Iowa College in 1860. A Quaker by birth and upbringing, I could not enlist. Instead, I joined the Western Sanitary Commission at St. Louis and nursed convalescent Union soldiers, war refugees, and freedmen.
Somewhere on the Mississippi River, June 15th, 1863. Dearest Joanna, thank you for your latest several letters. The honest truth is, you provide me with perhaps my only connection to sanity in this world that seems to have gone mad. I've had no time lately to write letters. About 8 weeks ago, I was reassigned, so some of your letters were also delayed in finding me. I am now working on the steamboat, the Red Rover. It is a large sidewheel steamboat fitted out as a hospital. We can navigate the Mississippi River and get closer to the fighting and thus closer to the wounded. Time is of the essence in saving these poor men. We can also transfer back to St. Louis to deliver the wounded to the hospitals there. I am working as an orderly, carrying patients and delivering food and supplies around the boat. I've had to assist the doctors occasionally, but I will not describe any of that to you. There are 6 hospitals up and running in St. Louis now, operated by the Sanitary Commission. That's about 6,000 beds for the wounded soldiers. The ladies of the city provide compassion and care, but there's more need than there are volunteer hours available. I expect your father is probably stationed at Benton Barracks. I have heard of the Graybeards. The regiment guards rebel prisoners being held there. They also assist with the hundreds of freedmen flowing into the army camps. I also expect that I am geographically closer to your brothers than any of us knows. The Red Rover has been running between Vicksburg and St. Louis. At Vicksburg, Grant has them closed off, but the rebel army is dug in. The city surely cannot hold out much longer. I long to wash my hands of this bloody war and to come home to quiet Grinnell. I long to go back to class and finish what we started. I long to see you, my beautiful dearest friend. Yours, Robert.
I am Emily Agnes Jordan, the second child of James and Melinda Jordan. I was born in 1842 in Clay County, Missouri, or the area of present-day Kansas City. My father and mother moved to Iowa, where they founded Valley Junction in 1846.
Valley Junction, Iowa, May 1st, 1863. Dear brother, I received your letter dated April 14th. We are all so glad to learn that you are well. We also worry that you'll mask your trials and those of your fellow Union troops with your characteristic humor. The number of your fellow soldiers in the 23rd Iowa Infantry who will not return to their homes and loved ones grows. I shudder when the casualty lists are published in the newspapers. When you were in Missouri, you wrote in more detail of the events. the challenges, your hopes and fears. Since you've joined General Grant's army and moved through Mississippi, your letters are briefer. But I know the danger is so much greater. If you can write more, perhaps it will help you. It will certainly help me. My dear brother, what have you seen? What do you expect? How long will this go on? What do you fear? What do you hope? I enclose $10 in case that may be of use to you. Know that our love and prayers are constant. Your sister, Emily.
I am Henry Clay Jordan. I was born in 1844. In 1862, at age 18, I joined Company A of the 23rd Iowa Infantry, organized from Des Moines and Central Iowa. The 23rd Infantry served in Missouri at Vicksburg and later in Texas and Arkansas.
Vicksburg, Mississippi, May 20th, 1863. Dear sister, I received your letter of May 1st. I expect for the next while I can be a better correspondent. As long as you're praying for me just so, I suppose I can take time for you. Anyway, here's what's kept me occupied since April. Hide and seek. You remember playing that when we were kids? It was especially fun in the dark. Well, we've been playing hide and seek with secession soldiers. Town to country, forest to river. They keep finding new hiding spots and we keep chasing them out. Except we don't yell boo when we find them. We yell surrender. And they say okay to that, but then they just can't stop. Talking, I mean, they surrender just the once. Sassy as you please, these secession Southerners. This captain surrenders to us. He says to me, y'all just dirty abolitionists, no blue coats, but black coats. Y'all devils, just like that dirty Abe Lincoln. And they cuss like I shouldn't write. That captain, he especially seems to dislike me, but I suppose that's because I had some rebukes to his cusses. He looks at me, where you from, you dirty tyrant? From the bottom of hell itself, that's where you from. No, I tells him, I'm from Iowa. It's a fair bit nicer than hell, but a giant bit better than Mississippi. The money you send me is kind, but not needed. You can tell that to Pa too. See, the secession rebels don't know what to do with their money either. On one of our backcountry hide and seek days, we came to this old woman's house where there was a quantity of honey. We thought the little honey would do us good, so we undertook to buy that honey from her. You see, that's what General Grant ordered us to do, buy, don't take. The old woman said she never sold less than a hive. Well, what will you take for a hive, I asked, taking out a roll of bills to show that I meant business. You uns want the honey, you can have it for $20. $20, I said, rather aghast. Yes, and I don't want those Yankee greens neither, said the old woman with a scornful jerk of her thumb at the roll of my bills. I want real money. What sort of money do you want? I want real Confederate bills. That stuff there ain't no count here. Oh, you want Confederate money, do you? Well, I can accommodate you, said I, giving her a Confederate $50 bill, for which she gave me $30 in change. Then we went for the honey and had a regular picnic that night. So I'm eating pretty well and saving up a good pile of greenbacks too. What did I see, dear sister? I fear I see how this whole war will come out. Our march cross country wasn't all bad, but now we're at Vicksburg. 3 days ago, we had a battle close up. We backed up the rebels to the Black River, which is close to Vicksburg and the mighty Mississippi. We pushed them back and we captured more than 1,500 secession troops. The rest ran to Vicksburg. As I write this, I'm looking at the high fortress where the Rebs retreated, Vicksburg. Everyone expects this will take a while, so we'll starve them out if we have to. When the river is ours, we cut off flow of troops, goods, food, all of it for the secession states. What do I expect? That this war will take time and it'll take lives. Of the more than 900 Iowans in our company, close to 300 won't be coming back. I just visited a friend from Story County in a field hospital. I hope he makes it. But if he makes it, it'll be without the bottom part of his right leg. Somehow I know that I'll make it back to Iowa to see you and everyone else. I don't know when. I don't know where this war will take me. No matter how hard coming battles will be, I'll end up better for fighting in them, and so will the Union. You keep praying, and I'll keep trying to find ways to laugh. I remain your brother, Henry.
I am Josiah Bushnell Grinnell. I was born on December 22nd, 1821 in New Haven, Vermont. I've been a schoolmaster, a land surveyor, a preacher, and a lawyer. I dreamed of living among neighbors who care about freedom and equality, education, and godly living, and I built that town. I pray that now we can create that nation as well.
Washington City, February 1st, 1865. My dear wife, it is hard on my patience, knowing that I send you news of which you will see in newspapers before you read it from my hand. But I shall attempt to share with you what was my view of yesterday's most momentous occasion. Congress has now passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. Section the first reads, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, where the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States or any place subject in their jurisdiction. Oh, what glorious words. The re-election of President Lincoln gave such potency to the popular voice that enough members previously opposed were swept into the majority current, thus voting aye. On the taking up of the question, there was a profound silence in the House, crowded galleries, and the most intense emotion. Solemnly, Mr. Thaddeus Stevens said, "We are about to ascertain the national will by another vote to amend the Constitution. The gentleman opposite will yield to the voice of God and humanity and vote for it. I verily believe the sword of the destroying angel will be stayed and this people be reunited." After the passage, with the vote not a vote to spare, there was a sublime moment at which the Congress was adjourned. It was a scene of handshaking, caressing, throwing of hats in the air, lifting a great burden from the loyal heart. The contagious joy reached the White House, where Mr. Lincoln was serenaded and congratulated upon the amendment vote, which shall be read around the world as a great moral victory. Oh, my dearest Julia, the joy of participation in this great event, for this moment at least, makes up for the separation from you and our girls. It almost makes up for the tedium and the red tape, which are hitherto the contaminants war has applied to the civil service. We shall see whether this victory might lead to a swift conclusion of the war. I now have modestly elevated hopes. Yours, Josiah.
On April 9th, 1865, Union Army General-in-Chief Ulysses S. Grant accepted Confederate General-in-Chief Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox, Virginia. On April 12, 1865, Abraham Lincoln paused in his labors to pen a reflective and affectionate note to his wife, Mary. Mary kept this note with her for years, reading and rereading it for comfort.
Executive Mansion, Washington City, April 12th, 1865. My dearest Mary, how quickly my concerns have switched from matters of war to peace. A petitioner just left me and asked for a permit to travel to Virginia. It was my delight to tell him that no pass is needed. He can go and return just as he did before the war. Other issues of the peace are more difficult. I've perhaps been too fast in desires and plans for reconstruction, but I strongly feel that the reorganization of the southern states can't be directed from Washington, though there is no shortage of ideas on how that very thing should be done. We can't undertake to run state governments in all the southern states. Their people must do that, though I reckon that at first, some of them will do it very badly. Now at the end of 4 years of war and struggle, the nation's condition is not what I or anyone could have devised or expected. Only God can claim foreknowledge of what has come. As God wills the removal of our great wrong, he wills also that we of the North, as well as those of the South, shall pay fairly for our complicity in this injustice. Oh, that we may rever the justice and goodness of the Almighty and continue to take up the work of building the United States to his will and the great ends he ordains. Surely he intends some great good to follow this mighty convulsion, which no mortal could make and no mortal could stay. Let us strive to be more cheerful, Mary. Between the war and our loss of our darling Willie, we have both been very miserable. Let us start to dream of what lies beyond our time in Washington. In the years that stretch peacefully ahead, we should travel. I should much enjoy traveling west to California, then perhaps to Europe. Years ago, we dreamt of that pilgrimage to Jerusalem, city and land we have always wanted to visit. I've set up 2 hours on Friday afternoon for us to take a carriage ride. Let's visit all these things. Spring is arriving and perhaps we can find some of the festiveness of the season for ourselves. General Grant has sent his regrets on our invitation for he and his wife to join us at Ford's Theater that evening. So please find another couple to join us. I do hope others don't think us disrespectful of Good Friday by attending a comedy, but my wish is for laughter over lamentation. A. Lincoln.
The two men who had warned Lincoln most often about his personal safety were Secretary of War Stanton and Marshal for the City of Washington and Chief Protocol at White House events, Ward Hill Lamont. To Lamont, he had laughing retorts. The envelope on which he had written assassination, wherein he filed threat letters, numbered 80 items by late March. He told Seward, "I know I am in danger, but I am not going to worry over threats like these." He told Lamont, "As long as this imaginary assassin continues to exercise himself on others, I can stand it. I think the Lord, in his own good time and way, will work this out all right. God knows what is best." On Friday, April 14th, 1865, at 10:13 p.m., John Wilkes Booth entered the back of Lincoln's theater box at Ford's Theater, crept up from behind, and fired a pistol at the back of Lincoln's head, mortally wounding him. Lincoln's guest, Major Henry Rathbone, momentarily grappled with Booth, but Booth stabbed him and escaped. Lincoln was taken across the street to Peterson House. After remaining in a coma for 9 hours, Lincoln died at 7:22 a.m. on April 15th. Stanton saluted and said, "Now he belongs to the ages." Let's please stand and sing Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. When we've endured 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know the days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
Thank you.
is our program, and we've got a little bit of time now for some questions and answers, and also for Kevin and Patty to talk about their book. Should we start talking about the book?
Yep.
Okay. All yours.
And so in 2005, we took kind of the nerdy family vacation, I suppose, one of many. Our 4 children were 72, and made our way from Nebraska City, ultimately to be here in Grinnell. And Patty and I grew up in Nebraska, and we missed it. And there was just some publications starting to emerge that time about Underground Railroad activities here in the state of Iowa. We couldn't believe the stories that were there, and just started to think about it. And I come from a long line of storytellers, I suppose, and I'm not an historian, but I thought there must be a way to tell the story. And so Patty and I started over dinner or after dinner to kind of develop some characters and ideas. And so I started to pen some chapters at that point and talk about it. But as with many things in my life, I sometimes start more things than I finish. Well, I do start more things than I finish. And so it sat for a long time, but much to my delight in 2016, Patty picked the manuscript back up, and most nights I would come home to have her read to me her work for the day. And then at some point we ended up back here in Grinnell with Barb, just talking about things, passing out our early manuscript that's gotten around and so on. And so that's the story of how we got to today. We were going to publish originally last summer, but we wanted to do events like these, and we hadn't planned for a pandemic, but we didn't want to let this year get by without doing it. So thank you very much for having us.
Any questions?
Yes, sir.
I wonder if in your book you mentioned somewhere along the line Tabor, Iowa. In your book, do you cover the Underground Railroad presence in Tabor, and if so, what do you say about it?
Yes, the Tabor appears in several chapters. So it's a little teaser in that the 5 characters, the fugitive couple, a young couple, and an older man, that they all meet together in Nebraska City and discover that they can aid this fugitive couple. And John Brown's traveling across the state was no secret at the time. What they called the Christmas raid, when he liberated those 12 slaves, had been in the newspapers, both the Democrat and the Republican press, so both sides of the story were being told. And so it was no secret that he was going to be crossing Iowa at some point. So he had often spent time in Tabor. The people of Tabor nursed him back to health when he was ill. They had sort of his paramilitary training camp there one summer. He spent several days in Tabor when they crossed the river, and the people of Tabor actually had a community meeting where they voted to censure him for those actions. And so he stayed a couple days longer and then left. And so our fictional characters know about his presence there, and they think all they have to do is get there and join up. And then they get there and it's 2 days late. So that sets up a chase scene across, well, the rest of the story is essentially chasing across the state in horses and wagons. And how do you set up, tension in that situation? So anyway, that's kind of the broad outline of the story, but Tabor is featured very prominently in the beginning of the story. Other communities go on. So in the research, I basically would, most people start with an outline for a book. I had a map and a calendar of February 1859, and I mapped out exactly where John Brown stayed every night because that's known in the historical literature. And then I worked my way backward, thinking how far can you walk or ride in a day? So where would my people be in the time earlier than that? And then also how far were they getting? Because I didn't want them to go exactly to the same stops all the time either. But that was my sort of working diagram of the story.
Those people in Tabor and other places were pretty ornery.
Go ahead.
Did you, when you mentioned, or someone mentioned, Lewisburg, did you stop then at the Hitchcock House?
Yes.
Where, you know, when you're at that house, you actually can read a letter that the J.B. Grinnell or the Grinnell congregation had written to Reverend Hitchcock.
Mhm.
You know, it's a wonderful stop,
Yes.
you know, to visit, you know, the basement and so on. It's really fun.
Yeah. So essentially all the major historic sites in the state are in the story. Some places that don't exist now, towns that are gone now, so.
Yeah.
And not teasing our children completely, you know, at that stowaway place at the Hitchcock House, or the same thing at the Jordan House in West Des Moines. Take children down there and the damp quiet of those places, and it makes a vivid impression.
So was it Henry Jordan's father who built the house?
In Jordan House
Yeah.
in West Des Moines, yes. So for the letters, we wanted people that were connected, and so I started thinking about someone that would be connected that was an actual soldier. And so I looked back through my information on Jordan and his family, and they had, I think, 11 children total. He had, with 2 different wives. His first wife died shortly after they moved to Iowa, or to West Des Moines, Valley Junction.
And Henry Jordan survived through the war, but was with the Army the entire time.
Good.
Regionalist painter Thomas Hart Benton has a very famous canvas depicting John Brown, and he looks like an absolute madman. And I'm wondering what assessment of Brown you have come to as a result of your research and thinking about this.
At our Ames event, someone asked what character was the toughest to write. And I said that writing dialogue that would be out of John Brown's mouth was the thing I was most trepidatious about. And so I essentially went through JB's autobiography and some other sources, and I copied out every quote I could of what John Brown actually was quoted as saying, and then I wrote dialogue and snippets and events to use those so that I didn't really make up or put any words in his mouth. I used what he said. And some of the ways that he said things, he really did sound kind of crazy.
You might share who's going to play him in the movie.
Oh yeah, we want Daniel Day-Lewis to come out of retirement and play John Brown.
One actor that might be able to capture a very complicated and probably crazy man.
Yeah.
Yes, right. So wonderful.
Thank you. I'd like to open up the floor to John to answer questions. If anybody has questions about J.B. Grinnell.
So John, you shared with us many accomplishments of J.B. Grinnell, enough seemingly that, you know, one man back then, our entire town today could take up what he did back then, and we still would have challenges doing so. I wonder what lessons today can we learn from J.B. as a college community, as a town, city council, what can we take forward from J.B.'s accomplishments and his fervor for life?
Well, that's a very simple question.
I know you've had some time to think about it.
This is a former student of mine. I think he's paying me back. That's a very thought-provoking question, actually. Maybe, I'm not sure if I can get beyond some of the obvious things of building a more inclusive community, building a community that respects knowledge and education and evidence, building a community that, I don't want to go all the way to the temperance part. And I think just the drive and the work ethic, we need to tap into the energy that all of us has to work to make a better community, make a more inclusive community. Claude Dolly Arend's foundation, leave it better than you found it idea. Those are my first thoughts.
John, so you're an anthropologist, maybe a little bit to the same issue, you know, what strains of what, you know, we're in J.B. Grinnell, but in this community, maybe a little bit of the country, do we see carried forward into today? Got to prohibition, but then we gave up on temperance, but there's some other parts of it, I think, probably some parts that are good, maybe other parts that aren't, but, you know, if you can do some ad hoc American anthropology for us, and you know, what we can see about ourselves today that we can learn from back then.
Oh, things that we can learn from back then. If you can't see God in everybody, you can't see God in anybody. Black Lives Matter. I think I'll just keep that one short.
John, one of the things that makes any person of notoriety great is their willingness to display the other side of them than the one that we idolize today. And Grinnell was certainly a person who was willing to take on and make himself very unliked by many. My favorite story of that would be the end of his congressional season and how he was beaten by another member of the legislature, the Congress,
Yeah.
Who happened to be from Kentucky. And that ended his political career. And as you noted, his only office after that was as mayor of this town, which he continued till shortly before his death. So talk a little bit about the other side of Grinnell and how he dealt with that animosity and great division that was prevalent in the country at that time.
Yeah, great question. And I would compare him in a way to Lincoln, that way, who also generated enormous animosity It was by no means a foregone conclusion that he would win the election, but it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that if he did win the election the first time, the Civil War would follow hard on the heels. And he, like Grinnell, I think, just had the what's the phrase, the strength of their convictions. And despite opposition, despite adversity, they felt that they had the right path in mind and that they were going to follow it and pull as many people along as they could. Yeah, Grinnell, I mean, in the three anecdotes, I didn't include that one, but that could have been a fourth anecdote where he insulted the state of Kentucky. And this Kentucky representative beat him with his cane, I think it was. Yeah, and why did he insult Kentucky? I don't know. I think that was one of his little slips that made him human.
You didn't mention his pacifism, because in that incident, the result of it was he did not fight back. He simply curled up on I think it was the steps of the Congress, and refused to lower himself to fight back.
Mm-hmm.
And when he got back to Iowa, they said, not much of a man for himself. How can he fight for his country?
Yeah, well, you can never please everybody, I guess.
Sometimes you can't please anybody.
Sometimes you can't please anybody, but yeah, Grinnell had his foibles. He strategized. Those of you who've read his autobiography or read his biographies of him, he strategized how to make the center of town on property that he owned rather than property that one of the other co-founders owned. He was kind of sneaky. He was born in pretty much poverty, but his wife's family had money. Well, maybe that was why he married her. I don't know. I'm sure she was a very nice person. He did use her money to buy up a lot of property here, and his whole career, in a way, started out of his business acumen. And so, yeah, I don't know how much farther to go, Shane, but it's really interesting to look at I don't know if you'd want to call it the negative side of famous people, because almost all famous people have negative sides the way we all have negative sides.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Do we know anything more about Julia?
I mean,
His wife, I mean, because I've not read his autobiography. I mean.
well, and the college, I don't know if you got into it, but the college has a nice collection of letters from Julia.
Oh, okay.
Did you?
No, I didn't.
Do you want to
know
say
that.
more about this question?
Well, I did not find a lot about Julia specifically. And his own autobiography, there's just like one paragraph at the very end about his wife and his family. So his own autobiography was focused on all of the political and business figures that he had met and done business with or whatever throughout that. So he was not a source that I found for information about his wife.
And interestingly, we don't have a picture of them together as a couple.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we have not been able to find, there's a picture of them individually, but there's not a picture in our archives or the museum of them as a couple.
And you mentioned Joanna Harris Haynes, and she has a nice description in her writing about Julia, which I would recommend for you. And go down to the college archives and take a look.
Take a look at her letters.
Letters. Really, it's neat. So I haven't studied her particularly, but there is information definitely more than is in the autobiography.
Isn't Chapin, Iowa named for her? Isn't it something to do with the founding that is by Sheffield?
Yep.
Is that right? Others are nodding.
Yeah.
I have read that and Then was there a Cape and Hotel there as well?
Yes.
Yes, that rings a bell. Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So at least you got a name.
Yeah. Any other questions for any of us?
Well, a big thank you to Jon Andelson and to Patty and Kevin Kimle for coming today and I don't know, broadened my horizons. You know, I work in the archive, I work with history, but it's always so wonderful when it comes to life like this. You know, it's just not on paper, but you hear it, feel it. And I just so appreciate it that you're here today. We all do. Thank you. I'd like to invite everyone to, anybody who would be interested in the book, The Only Free Road, copies are over here at the table.
I said I don't. I never read it.